Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Genealogy Day 2018. My name is Deborah Dudak. I'm the Adult and Teen Services Manager here at the Fountaindale Public Library. For our third and final presentation for the afternoon, we're going to have your predecessor's personality on paper, which is about handwriting analysis. Now, this is an interesting topic for a lot of reasons. You don't typically see handwriting analysis experts at genealogy conferences because it really is a science behind it, but most people don't know people. We know people. So Gina Pommier is going to be here. She's going to be giving the presentation for you this afternoon, which she was very fortunate for the people who are attending in person for our presentation today, had an opportunity to bring handwriting samples in, and she could actually discuss the samples. So if that's something that you'd like to see in the future, we'd love your feedback on that. If not, let's give Gina a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I'm so happy to be here. This is just an awesome place, and I appreciate you for inviting me, and thank you, Tina, for making all this possible. Thank you. Your presentation was wonderful. Really enjoyed that. I currently teach handwriting analysis at the Joliet Junior College. This has been pretty much a lifelong hobby for me. I also lead a discussion group in the Joliet area. Some of these folks have been studying handwriting analysis for 20 years or more. That's how long the group has been in existence. We used to meet at the junior college. Now we meet the first Fridays of the month at the Panera down in Joliet. I have information in meeting room B if you're interested in pursuing the study of handwriting analysis. And I really hope that you are, because it has not only benefits for you as genealogists, it has benefits in your daily life to help you understand the people in your life now and to help you understand yourself a little bit too. So anyway, all those resources are available to you. I will be staying afterwards, after this program. If anybody wants to bring their samples in, or if you just want to write something for me, that's fine too. So, what a deal. Okay. Program overview. What I'm going to do today is to explain in the course of this program what handwriting analysis is and what handwriting analysis is not. I'm going to give you some very brief historical highlights on handwriting analysis, some of the things that we look for when we're doing an analysis, how we assess personality traits from the different formations in the writing, what the ideal handwriting specimen is. Okay, and I do have a few that I saw today that were great. How we do an analysis step by step, and finally I'm going to recommend some resources to you if you decide to pursue this study. Okay, so what handwriting analysis is not. It is not paleography. It's a fascinating science where you go and look at these very old scripts, and you attempt to understand what it is they're trying to say. They may form the letters differently. They may have different words for things. Maybe they're just spelling phonetically, don't really have the education to know how something's spelled correctly. So we're not really seeking to understand what is being said, the message. Okay? It is not forensic document examination. Very often people think it's one of the same, and at some of our larger regional meetings, we do cross paths. But the thing is, with forensic document examiners, what they are seeking to do is to determine if a handwriting sample is authentic, if it's actually written by the person who they say it's written by, or if it's a forgery. Handwriting analysts look at some of the same traits that the forensic document examiners do. But the thing is, we are not trying to determine authenticity. What we are trying to do is make a determination of that person's personality traits based on the way they write, based on the way they use that space on the page. Handwriting analysis is not calligraphy. We would consider that artificial writing if people did that all the time, and some people do have this artificial script. But this is really more of an art form. it's not really something that is supposed to reflect your personality. In fact, you want to keep your personality out of it. You want to conform to whatever style it is you're trying to, copy. Okay, and of course, it's not fortune telling. A lot of people think, it's one of these things like reading tea leaves and so forth. And believe me, I'm not dismissing any of those things, but it is not fortune telling. At one time, handwriting analysis in the Dewey Decimal System was in the same category as the occult sciences. And one of our local stars in the field of handwriting analysis, her name was Rose Matusik. She was from Hinsdale. And she was instrumental in getting that designation changed from an occult science to the category where it really belongs, psychology. So if you're interested in sort of psychoanalyzing your long-lost descendant, your ancestors rather, this is a great way to do it. Okay, so handwriting analysis then, according to one of my favorite graphology, I use the term graphology and handwriting analysis interchangeably, so just sort of excuse that. Graphology for me is a little bit quicker and easier. Graphology can include doodling. Okay, so it's a little bit broader term, but again, it's all about psychological analysis based on what we see on paper. Anyway, Sheila Lowe, one of my favorite authors on the subject, describes handwriting as EEG, or the electroencephalogram brainwave recording. It's a good way to think about it because some handwriting analysts actually do use the term brain writing. Okay, so whatever's going on in your head, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, at the moment that you're writing forms a permanent record on that piece of paper. So your feelings, your thoughts, they're all sort of captured in time right there on that paper. So, one thing we have to consider, if you get a sample from somebody who's perhaps ill, they've had a setback, if you were to give me a sample today and you're happy and relaxed, it may show that, as opposed to if you gave me a sample and you almost had a car accident on the way here and were a little bit stressed. Okay, so it does reflect how you're feeling and thinking at the time you write it. Like body language, handwriting is an expressive gesture. But the most important thing for you as genealogists is that you can analyze somebody, you can do this, and they don't have to respond. Think about that. They can't argue with you either. But now think about this. Any other psychological test, the person being analyzed has to answer a bunch of questions, right? All we need is that sample of handwriting. It could be, hundreds of years old. That's all we need. Okay, so handwriting analysis is a means of determining personality traits based on the way a person writes, how they, again, arrange their writing on the page. It does not reveal your age. It does not reveal your gender. It does not reveal your religion. So it can be, and actually is used sometimes as a tool for personality selection. Okay, personnel selection. It can be used in determining a person's suitability for a given job. It reveals thinking patterns. It reveals your mood. It reveals how you're feeling. Again, remember that EEG analogy. It shows potential. Okay, so you may have some less than stellar traits show up in your handwriting, some things that may be problematic, but that doesn't mean that you're going to act on those things. You may have other factors in your writing that control for things like, you know, a temper or a tendency to be sarcastic or these sort of things. And we all have something, right? But again, you look at the sample as a whole and realize that the person won't necessarily carry out some of those things you see in the handwriting. Okay, so does handwriting tell you everything about a person? No, it does not. Is it 100% accurate? No, it is not. However, my own feeling is it's right more often than it's wrong. So we're not always on target, but you'll still know more about your ancestor or your neighbor or your whatever, your friends, whoever's being analyzed, than you would otherwise. You know, you might have somebody who's a perfect stranger, and you still will be able to know something about that person. So I do believe that it does have value. What do we look for in our analysis? Some of the general personality traits we look for are your social style. For example, are you an outgoing person? Are you an introverted person? You know, do you sort of hold back, or do you relate well to other people? You know, along with all those other things, are you kind of a bossy, controlling person? You know, all that. So you get an idea of that social style. You get an idea of their learning style and their thinking style. Is this a person who catches on really quickly? They have a critical mind. A person that perhaps learns a little bit slower, somebody that builds logically. We can determine if somebody is intuitive. So that's a good thing to know. We learn about their energy level, their use of their energy. Are they a go-getter? Are they somebody who tires quickly? So there's really many things that you can learn, surprisingly, from a person's handwriting. I'm going to give you just a few really brief historical highlights of handwriting analysis, since it's been around longer than you think. The classical Greek philosopher Aristotle was one of the first scholars to note that differences in script might be attributed to personality factors. And the ancient Chinese scholars were convinced that the distinct styles of calligraphy produced by different writers were due to differences in their personalities. The first academic work on handwriting analysis was done by an Italian by the name of Camillo Baldo. He was a physician and a professor, and his text translates as a treatise on the method to recognize the nature and quality of a writer from his letters. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Jean Michon, over there on the bottom left, a French priest and scholar, coined the term graphology and wrote a book in 1878 with a title translated as The Practical System of Graphology. His system of interpretation was based on the idea that you know, a single graphic sign stood for a single personality trait. And it was a very superficial way, let's just say superficial way of analyzing handwriting. Unfortunately, you see some of that analysis, some analysis is done like that today, but it's really more in the realm of entertainment. You know, a serious graphologist doesn't just look and say, oh, okay, well, you make your E that way, that means you're creative, and that's the end of it. Okay, so but at least he got started. In the bottom right is a picture of a gentleman by the name of Shula Krupp. That's as much French as I've got. I married a Frenchman. I'm not French myself. He was a follower of Abby Michon, but he developed a more holistic approach to handwriting analysis by studying the overall pattern of the writing and the effect of one characteristic on another rather than focusing on individual trait signs. He said that basing the study of graphology on signs alone is like trying to read prose by studying the letters of the alphabet. And I couldn't agree more. In the late 1800s, German scientists started to make important contributions in the field, and some of them in the early 1900s came to America, along with some other Europeans who also, had made some advances in graphology. It added a lot to the study of graphology or handwriting analysis in this country. Unfortunately, here in America, it's just never been as widely accepted, either then or now, as it always has been in Europe. My own personal history in graphology and handwriting analysis, this is from the early days of my study of handwriting analysis back in Joliet. My mom had joined a couple of her friends in these handwriting analysis classes. And this, you could see quite a crowd here at this workshop. But again, my mother, two of her friends had started studying these courses. She didn't keep up with it, but I have. So from the late 60s, early 70s, this is something I've studied as a habit. And you're thinking, wow, what a precocious 2-year-old she was. Actually, I was in high school. But anyway, it's been a lifelong interest, just because I really am interested in people, what makes them tick, how they think, and what drives that behavior. And this is one way to do it. It's just, I think it's a fascinating subject. I let it go for several years, back when my family was growing, when I was working. But in the late 1990s, I got involved with a course, with a club at the Joliet Junior College. And those folks, although we're not sponsored by the college anymore, a lot of them still meet, as I mentioned before, at Panera once a month, and we continue our discussion of handwriting analysis. So, again, I have information if you're interested in joining us sometime. Why study handwriting analysis? It's a means to improve the understanding of yourself and the people currently in your life, as well as those who have gone before us. It can give you insight into the way people behave. Now, you might know great-grandma and great-grandpa. Maybe they argued a lot. Maybe you just got that passed down through the family. You heard that they just really had a maybe difficult relationship. Well, if you had their handwriting, you could say, oh, okay, so great-grandma tended to be a little stubborn. Great-grandpa had a temper. You put those two together, you're maybe going to have some fireworks. So you can look and get some idea of, why things went the way they did way back when. So it's interesting. It's information you might not be able to get otherwise. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit of how we analyze handwriting, some of the things we look at. This is not everything that we look at, but if you were going to take a basic course, this is what we would be considering. The slant of the writing, the size of the writing, how the person uses their space, the pressure with their pen. Do they connect all their letters? Are some connected, some disconnected, or do they print? Some people are surprised. They think, oh, I can't have my handwriting analyzed because I don't write, I print. Well, yes, you can still analyze printing. How you form your letters, even the little eye dots and punctuation marks and the way you cross your T, all that's looked at, all that has significance. We look at the handwriting if it's simple or embellished, a lot of curlicues and fancy. Again, you kind of have to consider what style they learned. Okay, if you're looking at, did they learn Spencerian? Did they learn, Palmer? Consider what they learned so that you have some kind of a basis for determining how far they've departed from that standard. Okay, We look at writing speed, and yes, depending on how they form those letters, you get some idea of how fast they write, how quickly they put that on the paper. Okay, and legibility versus illegibility. It should be pretty self-explanatory, but again, this is probably where some of that paleography comes in, where you simply may not recognize the letter. So, again, you need to become familiar with the way the letters are formed if it's a very, very old writing. Okay, so these are, of course, very contemporary samples, but we look at the slant. In handwriting analysis, one of the basic principles is the left side of the page is the past. It's mom, it's home, it's you and yourself. That's all represented by the left. And when we move to the right side of the page, that's the future, goals, and dad. So a lot of interpretations are based on that left-right symbolism. When you have a handwriting that slants to the right, the interpretation is moving towards other people or expression of emotion. Because again, remember, the right side of the page is other people and future, okay, goals. The vertical script here, considered to be neutral. It's not holding back. It's not that backhand or leftward slant, just a neutral slant, head over heart. We do have the leftward slant on the bottom. And again, consider the interpretation here with the left. It's like a holding back, almost like your posture. In fact, one of the books that I'm going to recommend it to you, Andrea McNichol's book, does actually show different postures that can help you remember what those slants signify. And the left slant, holding back. That's what a teacher or lecturer just does not like to see. Someone back in their chair. Okay. If you can draw some connection with things you already know, in just these practical, universal truths, it's a lot easier to remember these things. But this is where that basis, those principles come in, rather than just looking at individual signs. Okay. So we look at the size of the handwriting, big, small, or in between. Now, I will tell you a problem with looking at old samples, or just sometimes any sample where you don't have an original, is if it's copied, you don't actually know what the size was to start with unless they tell you. It might be enlarged, it might be smaller. So that can be a little bit of a problem. But generally, the interpretation on these, I can tell you, this is the one at the bottom is a moderate size, your average size. Of course, the one in the middle is small, that's a large script on the top. Some of the interpretations that you have are the large script, somebody that doesn't mind being in the spotlight. The small script, you might have a little bit more retiring personality, more of a detailed personality, somebody who can concentrate on the details. And then you've got what we would call the copybook, like something based on the Pommier method. Just your normal response. Not outgoing, not retiring, just a normal average response. Spacing. Okay. Again, remember that left-right symbolism. Okay, so the top, you've got a person where great horizontal expansion. So the interpretation in something like that is, perhaps somebody who could be they might be a little impulsive. They could be a little bit extravagant. They're taking up so much space. A little thrifty, maybe. Maybe a little stingy. I have seen this afternoon where some of the samples, the writing goes from the left margin to the right margin. Well, I'll call it margin, but there's really not a lot of space there. What we consider to be a normal margin now is a 1 inch all around. Okay, but there's really no space. That can be frugality. And considering, if it was done turn of the century, early last century, people had to conserve. They can't, we get a whole ream of paper and we just go through it, don't we? But they perhaps had to be a little more conservative with their resources. We just couldn't go and get a cheap pen, and even if you were using a quill, that was still a lot of work to grab that goose and make it, right? So, that's like I said, I'm seeing a lot of that. But you've got somebody that crowds other people, some repression, stingy. That's what spacing tells you. Okay, and pressure. Interpretation of pressure can be the force that you put against the world. My husband's a very heavy writer, very heavy. You can tell, like on the third or fourth page underneath that he's been writing on. It's extremely heavy writing. But somebody who writes like that has got tremendous energy. They've got tremendous stamina, and he does. He can work for 12, 16 hours straight. He's got tremendous energy. The thing about those people, too, with that really heavy pressure, they can have a very deep emotional memory. They might forgive, but they won't forget. Okay. This actually isn't so much of a light writing as a shaded writing, somebody who's sensitive to the environment. But the light writers tend to be people who intellectualize things. They tend to be more sensitive. And of course, you got your just middle of the road writer. One thing about what the writing appears to be as far as pressure, again, that's a problem with your copies, because they might be using a felt tip, if it's a more recent sample, a felt tip pen, where it looks like it's a heavy, hard pressure writing, when in fact it just might be the pen, and they just want to make that statement, get more bang for the buck. So again, it's a little bit of a issue with a copy trying to determine the pressure. That's why it's great to have an original sample. If you see something that looks like a heavy pressure, you feel the back of the page. If you can feel the writing going through the page, and if you have an original sample, that's one way to judge your pressure. Okay, cursive printed and combined forms. Again, these are all contemporary samples. The first one, very connected. Somebody who starts a job, finishes the job. We've got the printing, the next two, and then we've got a combination at the very bottom. Often they say that when you have a cursive form and you have these breaks in the form, that can be one indication of intuition in your writing. Sometimes the printed forms even have a little bit of connection in them. You can see if the letters touch. But they've eliminated one thing if there's no connections at all. They can eliminate one characteristic that you would analyze. Sometimes they interpret printing as somebody who doesn't want to reveal their personality. So there's a lot of different interpretations. Some of you that want, a hard and fast, a very definite interpretation might get frustrated with. Okay, just the fact that it can be this or it can be the other thing. But if you have a little bit of background, you can say, oh, okay, maybe this person did have, I don't know. I keep coming back to temper issues, but that's easy. Okay. Letter formation. Again, we've got the copybook forms. What handwriting analysts look at is, this is another one of your real big basics. We look at the formation in what we call this middle zone, these circle letters. The symbolism of this middle zone is the daily life. The letters that project up above that middle zone, the F and the B, the D, those loops are considered to be spirituality, philosophy, you know, the visionary, if you go way up there. And of course, below the baseline, that's more the material, biological needs, subconscious. It would be F, G, the Y, and then the way they've made the Z. That's the interpretation. And the emphasis, if one zone is emphasized on the other, remember I talked about thinking patterns. You say, okay, that's where they're coming from. You know, maybe they, you know, it's all about ideas, or maybe if it's below the line, it's all about getting things done. And of course, the middle zone, it's here and now, the practical daily life. And those zones are going to change a little bit depending on the form that they were taught. So just keep that in mind. Okay. The punctuation and diacritical marks. Yes, we even look at the ways your I's are dotted. We look at the periods. We look to see, you know, if maybe perhaps we've got too much punctuation, maybe just a little too much drama in the writing. And simplification and elaboration. The top sample, by the way, is actually Hillary Clinton. The thing about Hillary Clinton's writing, I like to have her samples up because Hillary plays all the cards in her handwriting. She has all the different connective forms, all the writing forms. She has the forms that show, you know, logical thinking, creative thinking. She has forms that show critical thinking, a little stubbornness there, diplomacy. But she's basically playing all the cards that are available to her. It shows all the different connective forms in her handwriting, so I like that. But it's a simple handwriting. Simplicity, you know, speed, original formations, those are all signs of intelligence. And then we have these. Well, thank you, juvenile. Well, but now think about this. You know, when you're doing all these curly cues and, you know, fiddling around and, you know, it's wasting time, isn't it? You know, perhaps, especially since it's the signature, if somebody is maybe just a little bit too involved with themselves, you know, maybe a celebrity, or maybe they would like to be a celebrity. You know, some of the celebrities do that. They have this, you know, writing that looks like pictures, or, you know, we call it a persona writing. Well, yes, they can be creative, but again, you know, it's a lot of fooling around. It's a lot of elaboration. You know, you can always be creative in other ways besides all this. You know, what I'm looking at is all the curling and the looping and, you know, all this elaborate. You could still have original forms without having all that flourishing. Okay. So, all right. Speed. Okay, so I bet you can tell which is the speedy writing or which is speedy writings. I'm going to give you a clue. Speedy writings. Would you say that's speedy? No. Okay. So you know this. You know, when it's very carefully formed, when the eye dots are just precisely over the stem of the eye, you know, maybe a little rounded. It's got that vertical slant. It's pretty static, right? It's not really moving forward. The second sample, we do have this person moving forward. See this, how we come up here? It's not great form, though, because you really can barely read it. If write sometime, get together soon. If you took this out of context, would you know it was soon? One way to determine if it's illegible, if you took it out of context, would you know what it is? Okay. So, yes, it's speedy, but, you know, not necessarily good. You know, somebody maybe a little brighter would think of an original way to cross those T's and keep going. Okay, this is why cursive can be quicker than printing, because it's connected. You're not raising and lowering your pen all the time. All right, this is actually from a note I got from, I believe it was one of the chancellors at the University of Wisconsin. I love this particular sample because it's speedy, it's legible, there's original forms, there's you know, some very creative connections there. Look, we've dispensed with the loops and the F, but it's all about speed and moving forward, but still, again, very, very legible writing. Yes?
Question. How do we go about judging with all of these when the next generation does that on top rather than the cursive? That are we going to do away with your thoughts on?
Right. Okay. The question is, what about the next generation that really isn't learning cursive? And I know what you're talking about because when I do this with the college students,
That's who I'm talking about.
when I do this with the college students, what I get is a page of paper that's printed, and then at the bottom of the page is this totally illegible signature. Are you finding that? It is just a complete scrawl. There's no way you'd ever know what that person's name was, right? Okay.
We're in the same boat.
All right. You still can interpret their handwriting. Now, the problem is if they don't know how to write cursive and don't know how to read cursive, how can they go back and know what they're saying in the Declaration of Independence and all those historical documents? Okay, they need to learn it, and supposedly cursive is coming back. Now they're changing. New American Cursive is one style that's coming back. They are coming back, but they're not bringing back Palmer and Genealogy. Those they're coming up with new forms. Some of these new forms might resemble more of a print script, but still, it's a cursive and it does have the connections. But hey, believe me, I'm with you. They need to learn cursive and they need to do cursive. But yes, and this is really typical to what I see. That plus that big mid zone. It's all about today, right now. It's not about future thinking. You have a question?
Yeah, is there a difference in interpretation when the individual is left-handed as opposed to right-handed?
Okay, the question is there a difference in interpretation if the person is left-handed versus right-handed? Now, people who are left-handed don't necessarily write with that backhand script. There's a very common misperception that if you're left-handed, you're going to write with that left slant. My son is left-handed. He has a vertical script. My mother-in-law is left-handed. She has the normal right script. The interpretation of a lefty who has that right script is somebody who is more conforming. They're conforming to what's expected of them. So yes, they can do it. It's really tough, maybe even impossible to determine if you've got somebody who wrote right-handed or left-handed on the page. However, sometimes you might get little clues. Sometimes a lefty will, instead of crossing from left to right, sometimes they'll come right to left. So there may be a little bit more of that, what we call like a left trend in a lefty's writing. Okay, did I answer your question? Okay, good. All right, okay. And did I answer your question? Okay. All right. The ideal handwriting sample. Okay, we should have an original sample if we could. I realize, a lot of you don't, but if we can actually have the sample that the person wrote on, that would be the best. Written on a full-size piece of paper, you're 8.5 by 11 or close to it, as opposed to a postcard, a napkin, a Post-it note, that sort of thing, because then they're not restricting their writing, because we do look at the way they use the space. Just think, if you've got a Post-it note, you're probably going to restrict the size somewhat, right? So, full-size piece of paper is best. A script with the signature included. We want to see how they write the script, and we want to see the signature. I'm going to give you the basis of my signature class. You're going to get a sneak preview. The signature is not necessarily something that reflects your personality. The signature is how you want to be perceived by people. Okay, so it's you outside the house. and then the rest of the script is how you actually are at home. If they match up, okay, well, what you see is what you get. But the signature could be more elaborate than the rest of the text. The signature could be bigger or smaller. All right, so it's good to have both the script and the signature, and it's good to have the date. So at least you have an idea of the person's age when they're writing it. Now, here's the thing. If they're writing like a 13-year-old and they actually are 13 years old, that's great. But if they're writing like a 13-year-old and they're 45, then, hey, it happens. Well, right? It happens. So, the thing is, you can't tell age from handwriting, but you can get an idea of emotional maturity. So you're going to look and see, is that appropriate for that age? Again, with a really old sample, it might help you determine what style of writing they learned. Was it the Copperplate or Spencerian, whatever. Okay. All right, how do we actually do an analysis? This is from Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so we've got the old Copperplate. So we're going to consider the style of writing. These days, some of the things that he does, we say, oh, maybe this would be perhaps a little long. The lower extensions would be a little bit long these days, but for Copperplate, that's okay. So again, consider the style that they were taught. Even though in Lincoln's time, oh, you have a question? Oh, Copperplate is a style of writing also known as roundhand. It was taught, oh my goodness, I'm going to say 1800, I bet you know, yeah, 1800s, the early 1800s.
Early 1800s onward, when they stopped using secretary hand. So kind of Copperplate kind of grew out of that.
Right, it's a more simplified writing form. So probably, even though Spencerian script came about in Lincoln's lifetime, what he learned was the Copperplate style. So you've got the just really beautiful, graceful letter A. But and I've seen some of this today. These little flagpoles on the P. Today we would interpret that as somebody who's argumentative. But, if they've learned that in the form of writing, you say, well, okay, that's the style that they learned. Oh, so here's another one. Got that little, see that? Cooperate, see that little loop up there? Again, in present day, we would say that's somebody who likes to argue. But if it's part of the writing style, that's the way they learned it. Okay, I'm not sure because of this. On the side, it looks like possibly something was cut out or some damage to this thing. But if that's actually the way he positioned it on the entire page, that's pretty wide margins. Okay, somebody's got a really wide margin right and left. They could be a little, maybe a little bit of isolating. It's more space than what they need. He had, of course, a history of depression. When the lines go down, you see it's a little subtle, but you see this? At the end of the line, that little bit of a dip. Okay, sometimes the entire line goes down. Sometimes the word goes down. But when you see that like downward slope, it could be just tired, but again, can be discouragement, can be depression. He's got that nice, moderate right slant. Somebody that, is sympathetic, empathetic, reaches out to others. Remember that symbolism with the right side of the page. We don't know the size exactly. I suspect it's a medium to small size script, but it's a copy, it's a reproduction. We don't really know. But again, I suspect it's small to medium, which would mean somebody who is. He's a president, right? He's in the limelight, but he's not like the big showman type of person. Appropriate width of the letters, appropriate spacing between the letters. So he allows himself space, if you want to call it that, allows others space. appropriate spacing between the words. And no tangling between the lines. So he's very organized. He keeps everything straight, keeps everything clear. Okay.
We have about 10 minutes presentation and 5 minutes for questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Appreciate that. What would I do with you? Keep me on target here. Okay. It's not a fast writing. Rushed. I should say rushed, but it's speedy enough. It's simplified enough. The interpretation when you've got a simplified, faster writing is it's an intelligent person. Okay. It's when you got these really slow, ornate, writings that you kind of wonder that maybe they're maybe a little bit mentally slow, or, sometimes there's even an interpretation of dishonesty if they're writing really slow. So, anyway. Okay. You see there's some thickness and thinness. Of course, that's probably due to the writing instrument he used. He could have had a pen, although he preferred, I guess, a quill. I was on the internet the other night, and a gentleman from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library was showing this quill that Lincoln had on his desk the day that he was shot. I guess he actually enjoyed using quills, preferred to use them, even though he certainly could afford a pen by that point, and they were available. Fountain pen. Okay. I will have questions in just a minute, but I will tell you that I have some recommendations on your handouts of some books if you're interested in pursuing handwriting analysis, just as for yourself, for study. The 3 that I recommend are actually available through the library system. Okay, I actually have the books back there in meeting room B if you want to see what they look like, but they're available through the library system. You might have to get an interlibrary loan, but you can get them. The reason I like these books, and I don't get any compensation for recommending these books, the reason I like them is they take the principles of some of these old German graphologists and they explain them in contemporary ways. Okay, so it's not like they're coming up with new theories, but they're explaining them in clear and contemporary and easy to understand ways that you'll probably like. The other thing is about these books that I recommend, they deal with the holistic method of analyzing handwriting. There's some of the better books out there. The ones that I consider the lousy books, remember we talked about that method that Father Michon came up with the just, okay, one graphic sign indicates one personality trait. Those are the lousy books that you might want to avoid. You know, they're, it might be on compatibility or, all these crazy books. But, they go through and you see, okay, if you make the letter B this way, it means that you can't hold on to money. And if you, the thing is, but they don't always explain what it is you're looking at even. You look at this and you don't know what actually it is that they're explaining. The best way is to learn basic principles, because some of these basic principles, even with all these crazy little traits, can carry through the handwriting. So you're not having to keep a million things in your head. It couldn't do it anyway. It would be frustrating. And I think that's one of the reasons that people really don't study handwriting analysis that much. It's just the way it's been taught and the way it's been presented, it's just too doggone complicated. So, again, if you learn some of the basic principles, sometimes you can just make a judgment on your own. You might not know exactly what it means when they've got this enormous loop in the lower zone, but you know the significance, the lower zone, remember below the line of writing. But if you know the significance of that, you say, whoa, what's going on there? We got a lot of interest in that lower zone. Okay, so you can make some assumptions and make some educated guesses if you at least know the basic principles. So that's what I would like to steer you towards. Okay, so you do have a list of books. Those 3 can be gotten through the library. I teach a couple classes this summer at the Romeoville Library. One is a doodle class, because I've got people, as you know, who say that I don't write. Okay, well, maybe you doodle, so you can apply some of the principles of handwriting analysis to these doodles, the use of space, the pressure, is it angled, is it curved, that sort of thing. So there's a one session doodle class, and then there's a 1 session signature class, which basically just kind of gets your feet wet as far as some of the things I've explained today. And you get to analyze your own handwriting, your own signature. That's the best part. You know, it's kind of hard to really understand ourselves sometimes. So, you know, there's the person that, you know, we are, you know, the person that other people, you know, think we are, and, you know, our whatever perception we have of ourselves. So, you know, it's a little hard to know yourself. Okay, I really recommend, if you are interested and if you got a little bit of knowledge under your belt as far as handwriting analysis, I really recommend joining a professional organization where you'll get additional resources and learning. And, you know, again, you're all welcome to come to the monthly discussion groups down in Joliet at the Pommier, but just not all on the same night, because I don't think they can hold I don't think the restaurant will hold all of you. So, do you have any questions for me? I will be, if you want your handwriting analyzed, your handwriting, your relative's handwriting, I will be back in meeting room B, but you had a question?
I'm just curious as to why he wrote that, the letter. Do you all analyze the margins? Because it looked like he stayed within his margins.
But see this, you know, to me it almost looks like there's something, you know, either ripped or, can you see that? It looks like, yeah, it looks like something might be missing this. So it's a little tough to tell on this sample. You know, if this actually was just taken off, you know, this, again, somebody who does not go to the end of the page, he could get a little bit closer. You could, but the interpretation when you don't go, remember this is the future now.
Right.
Okay, so maybe you're holding back. You know, maybe there's some reluctance to move ahead. Okay. So, any other questions? Oh, you have a question in the back?
Someone's faking the handwriting.
Can
Someone is faking their handwriting.
Oh, you absolutely can tell if somebody's faking the handwriting. Well, see, that's what the forensic document examiners do. But there are some things that we can look at. One of the things is that slow writing, you know, where they're and what we look at, and it's obviously tougher when you're using a quill pen or a fountain pen. We look for blobs, and the forensic document examiners look for the little blobs of ink where you stop and the ink just sort of pools right there. Okay, so now if you want to avoid forgery, the best thing to do is to do a quick signature and connect it. Because the thing is, if you break those letters, every time you stop, then the person who's trying to copy that signature, whatever, okay, now we get another chance to reposition our pen, okay? So you want to do it connected and you want to do it fast.
Do you ever have students or people you see are trying to write in a way to try to fool you?
Do I ever have people who write in a way to try to fool me, to write in a style that is not their own? I'm sure that I do. I'm sure that I do. But, you know, for the most part, I don't think the kids really, I don't think the kids try to fake me out too much. But, yeah. Any other questions?
If we have a question, do you have an email that we can?
I do, as a matter of fact, and well, it's on the little cards I have over in meeting room B. So if you want to be on the mailing list for that little graphology discussion group, I'll be happy to send you the announcements. You know, again, we're not chartered, there's no dues, we don't have a president, we don't have a treasurer. You know, it's a bunch of friends that just get together who've been studying the subject for a long time. And sometimes they bring in samples from, you know, coworkers, whatever. You know, they might bring in interesting articles. And we try to have a program, a regular program. So what I'm working on for next month is using handwriting analysis and career selection. So, no, you think I've just kind of borrowed a lot of this. We always borrow information. We're just notorious for borrowing each other's information. But yes, do you have another question?
Yeah, being a left-handed writer, when I write and I don't do hook writing, I'm below the line, resting my hand. As I'm going across, if the paper is not lined, my line will veer up or down, even on an envelope. Will that skew your interpretation?
Okay, the question is, this gentleman is left-handed, and when he's writing across the line, you're saying the whole line tends to dip up or down?
Because I can't see the beginning of the line.
Oh, you've covered it with your hand.
Yeah.
Well, you said it's making like a
Sometimes
convex.
it's up or down.
Do you see any pattern? Is it always a convex curve?
No.
Why don't you see me after the program? Sometimes the way people describe stuff is not actually the way it is. So you know, the interpretation for a line of writing that goes up and down, the line of writing reflects your mood. So if the line of writing goes up, often it's interpreted as optimistic or enthusiastic. Okay. If the line of writing goes down, as Lincoln's did, you know, this dropping the line, okay, that's interpreted as you know, being discouraged, tired, depressed. But when it goes up and then it goes down, the interpretation is, okay, we're going to start the job and we're going to do great. Oh, but I am so tired. Okay, so and the opposite of that is, oh, I just can't do this job, but I think I can. Okay, so that's reflecting your mood. But if would you have time to come to meeting room B after the program? Okay, that'd be great. And then you can show me what you actually do.
Tina has a question, and that's our last
Okay.
So my question is, what about people who raise a word or lower a word in the sentence? So they're writing straight and then
Just that one word. Just that step up word. Okay. You know, that's what we call like a trigger word. All right. So you know, when people, and I'm an offender with this, I tend to write above the line, which can be like spontaneity, impulsivity, you know, but that can be, you know, ascending where, you know, you're feeling a little bit better about that, and then below the line, it's, you know, maybe more of a negative connotation. Do you actually, what is it that the person is doing more? Is it above or below?
I have a document where somebody is writing a letter to a third party, and when they mention me, it's up above.
Oh, they like you. They hold you in high esteem, just like everybody else here, right? Yay! Oh, Tina! Woo!
I don't know if that's true or not, but
That's what I would say. You had another question.
I have a question about people who write using cursive and manuscript writing in the same word.
Okay, so they write and print. It's a combination of writing and printing. Well, that's their own original form. You know, I know that some people, I do that, some of that too. You know, again, especially if it's like a capital letter and it's printed, that's considered efficient, that's considered mature. Okay, do you have a sample with you today, or no?
No, I just remembered some of my teachers used to write on the board. They would mix cursive and manuscript. So I was
Together.
just wondering, was that anything particular?
Well, you have the breaks. You know, you probably have the breaks, so it's not a totally connected writing if you're doing that, right? Okay. So the other thing about those breaks in the writing, sometimes we interpret them as intuition, but sometimes we interpret it as somebody starts a job and then they stop. Maybe get a little distracted, put it down, then get back to it later. So, you know, it could just be their style of doing things. You know, if you got a classroom full of people, full of kids, maybe you do have to kind of put things aside and deal with something and come back to it. So it could be that. What you worry about more as far as inconsistencies within the word is, you know, when some of these letters just kind of pop up and you might have a misplaced capital letter where maybe one of the interpretations of that is they maybe have like an emotional outburst, you know, that pop up capital letters. So that's the ones we really worry about. Okay.
All right, so that's the end of our webinar series today and end of our session. So,
Thank you.
Fantastic. So, thank you to all of our friends who have been watching online. We really appreciate it. And drop us a line. You all will be getting a webinar and a in-person program form. So we look forward to hearing your feedback, and we look forward to hearing your suggestions for next year. So for the people who are here in person, we will be having door prize drawings. And for the people online, we hope you have a really great day. And thank you guys so much for coming out, making Genealogy Day a fantastic event again. Thank you so much.